good to go.
Good evening. We will call this meeting to order at 4:01 p.m. Ms. Wheelwright, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Ray Santos. I don't see him on here. Councilmember David Fenn.
Here.
City Manager Todd Parton. Not here. I believe he has a conflict in meetings this evening. Economic Development Manager Kyle Warzinski.
I'm here.
Member Ahmed stated that he would be absent this evening. Member Richard Beneke. Member Evan Brown. I don't see. Member David Gecka.
Here.
Member Alan Coblin.
Here. I can barely hear you, Nicole.
Oh, okay. Let me try moving my mic
Much
a little
better.
bit.
Thank
Okay,
you, much better.
good. Glad you made it. Chairman Von Lawson.
Present.
Member Rob Moran. Member Betty Rader.
Present.
Member Carl Vince stated he would be absent this evening. And Beaumont Unified School District student Angelina Segovia. I don't see. I do see Mr. Beneke is in attendance currently, so I will mark you as present. Alternate member Cassandra Samuel.
Present.
And alternate member Trina Fregoso. I don't see on here. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Wheelwright. We've already dealt with any action on requests for excused absences. At this time, and respectfully, I will ask a veteran, alternative member, Ms. Samuel, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Is everyone ready? Here we go. Here we go. Ready?
Yes.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United
of the
States
States of
of
America,
America and to the
to the
republic
republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
Nation.
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
With
for
liberty.
liberty
and
and
justice
justice for
for
all.
all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Samuel. I have to remark, I don't know what I did the last time that we were in a meeting. I ran everybody off. It's so good to see all of your faces, albeit I think I can pull this down just a little bit so you can hear me better because we have so much space in here. But it's so wonderful to see all of your faces, albeit in our Hollywood Squares today, our Economic Development Committee Hollywood Squares. Good to see your smiles, and I'm so glad that everybody's remaining safe and staying safe, and I hope we're out of these squares very soon and back fellowshipping together. That said, as we begin to get started, are there any conflict of interest disclosures that need to be addressed, Ms. Wheelwright?
None that I'm aware of, but the members can tell me if there's otherwise.
Fantastic. Okay. Then what we will do, again, we are getting ready. Are there any public comments that need to come before this body?
Let me check for any written comments. Sorry, give me just a second. No written comments. Heather, do we have anyone on the line?
No, we do not.
Thank you very much. With that, we are going to move on to approval of the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes.
All right. That being heard, I will entertain a motion for us to approve the minutes as standing or with amendments as necessary. I'll entertain a motion. It has been moved and properly second. All in favor of the minutes being approved, do we call the roll?
I do have to call roll
Got
because
it.
of the hybrid situation.
We'll
Can I
ask-
verify
we'll
the second, though? I missed who the second was. I'm sorry.
Could you again say who made the second, please? Who made
I'll
the
be the
second?
second. I'll be the second.
Was it Ms. Rader? It was Ms. Rader, yes. Thank you, Ms. Rader.
Thank you, and I'll call roll. Sorry, I'm gonna go through here and try and only call those that are here. Councilmember Santos.
Aye.
Councilmember Fenn.
Aye.
Kyle Warzinski.
Yes.
Member Beneke.
Yeah, but I have some comments after we vote on it, but I'll go ahead and approve for now.
Okay. Member Geka.
Aye.
Member Copeland.
Aye.
Chairman Lawson.
Aye.
Member Raider.
Aye.
And that's it. Thank you.
All right. That said, Chair recognizes Mr. Benecki, who had some observations that he would like to make.
Yes, on the minutes, I just think there needs to be a little more detail in the sense that when it says updates on projects, maybe highlight some of those projects. Also, when we have the presentations, it'd be good to put down who made the presentations. Just a little more that the committee discussed it, if anything else. I mean, just in general, the committee discussed the presentation, but just to leave it blank that way, it doesn't look like anything happened. I'm just used to having a little more information on the minutes, because the minutes become actually public record. And I think if anybody were to delve in and look at the minutes, they would look to see that there'd be more than what is presented in the minutes that were presented this time. Basically, it was just looked like another agenda. It didn't look like any minutes. That's just an observation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benecki. Noted and in the record now. Thank you. At this time, I will defer to Mr. Warsinski to give us updates of projects from city staff.
Thank you, Committee Chair, members of the Economic Development Committee. Before you tonight, I have a couple different updates that are going on out there, and I'm going to reserve most of the time for tonight's meeting for the retail coach, our city's consultant, on the next item. So I'm going to go through the major projects fairly quickly. As you do know, the sewer treatment plant has been upgraded, so we're progressing on the next phase of that project, which is the expansion portion. And this will be an expansion that I think gets us to 6 million gallons per day in terms of capacity, which is on our way to the ultimate capacity in the future. What that means for this committee and anyone that might be watching, interested in economic development or what the city's doing, is that without capacity at your treatment plant, you're very limited in terms of what residential projects, what commercial projects, or industrial projects can be built within your city, because if you can't treat the sewer flows, or if you don't have capacity to allow for new connections, obviously that is not going to bode well for attracting new businesses in here, right? So when we go after new businesses, they all want to know about infrastructure. Sewer is one of those critical pieces of infrastructure that sometimes goes unnoticed or maybe taken for granted. Same way with water. But as I think Councilmember Fenn would attest to, water is not an easy infrastructure component or commodity to come by these days, and sewer treatment it ranks right up there with it. As long as I think those are probably a little bit more difficult than electric or gas these days. So with that said, I'll move on to the next one. You may or may not have noticed that a couple of those businesses we've been anticipating to be opened within the 2nd Street area have opened. So hopefully all of you have frequented Planet Fitness to get a tour, or maybe have signed up for a gym membership, if you will. And I did learn that if working out isn't your thing, you can actually get massages in their massage chairs, and tanning for the I think it's the black membership level that they have there. So if you don't really want to work out and you want to tell all your friends you went to the gym, you could just sit in the massage chair, and that works well as your workout for the day. And then Ulta Beauty recently opened about a week or so ago. They had their grand opening. So we're excited about that business being open. And now we're working with the landowner to fill, I want to say, 2 inline spaces, 1 end cap, and then there's another pad on the caddy corner, which is next to the movie theater, that we're working on in the final lease negotiation, and I think they were submitting building plans for that building itself. So that's pretty exciting. Moving on to the movie theater, you all know that it's going to be a Cinema West luxury theater with, I believe it's 12 screens. I've been speaking with the owner of the company, and they're anticipating a May opening date. And their thought process around that was that they're hoping to coincide our grand opening within their Beaumont location with the release of major motion picture films coming out of the film studios. So now that we're an orange tier in Riverside County and similar tiers around us, we may have already gone to the movies, or you may be thinking about going to the movies and you're looking at the box office list. And in my opinion, the options out there for movies are somewhat limited these days, right? It's nothing crazy. No real, what I would call Class A films are being released at this point in time. They were all held back in 2020 due to the pandemic. But from what we're being told, those should be releasing in 2021. So Cinema West is hoping that occurs and trying to really line up their grand opening here with some of those main motion pictures that we're all anxious to kind of go out and see. If you want to know about what's occurring on the legislative level, I can let you know that since I'm working on some of those. So with I think it's the American Jobs Plan that President Biden has put forth in Congress. It's not approved yet, just introduced. The concept of earmarks or federal appropriations are coming back for discussion and possible inclusion within that bill. So what he's looking at doing is including dollar amounts for jurisdictions, and our local congressman, Dr. Raul Ruiz, is soliciting projects for these earmarks or appropriations. So staff has been submitting or working really hard on submitting projects to the congressman in hopes that they may be included in the appropriations bill as it moves forward through the Congress process. And that concludes my report on major projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warsinski, I'm sorry. I'll defer back to Mr. Warsinski because he's going to bring us the retail market analysis, or introduce it, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So before you tonight, I have Austin Farmer from the Retail Coach to present the work product that's been completed to date for the retail market analysis. And I know this is something that the Economic Development Committee has seen in the past. We reviewed the RFP and we talked about the proposals, and we ended up bringing that to City Council. The contract was awarded in late 2020, and Retail Coach started work on the process almost immediately. So what we really were looking for is updated demographic and psychographic data beyond what you would typically see from a stat sheet that a city has. The typical data that cities have revolve around population numbers, median income numbers, age levels, ethnicity makeup, and somewhat stop there. There's some other ones that are a little bit better in terms of daytime population, commuter population, where commuters are going to work, what work sectors they are actually working in, and the income levels that they have within those work sectors. But beyond that, there's there's a treasure trove of data that's available to us. And we needed a consultant to be able to really crunch those numbers, put it all together in a nice package for us, and also help us really understand what those things mean. So with that said, I don't want to steal Austin's thunder in terms of presenting what he's completed to date, but what we wanted to do is allow them to complete really the core market analysis that we hired the company to do. And that work product has been completed. So I wanted to present it to the Economic Development Committee today for your review and comments and suggestions before we take it to the City Council at a future meeting. So with that said, Austin, I will kick it over to you and go ahead and share screen for the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It's great to be with you, committee. I'm looking forward to sharing what we've done to this point, and really just filling you guys in on where we're at in the process. I'm going to share my screen here so I can show this presentation. Give me just a second. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, great. So to Kyle's point, we were hired by the city to come in and do a retail market analysis to really identify not only who's in the community, so like Kyle said, those base level demographics, but really what your core retail customer looks like. And so really digging into not only just, incomes and age levels, but really dig into consumer behaviors and look at where people are coming into the community from to shop and dine, and ultimately where they're leaving to go as well, really within the overall goal to identify where there's opportunities to grow retail in the community. And so as we've started that process, we really had 3 key objectives that we've been looking through and really kind of guiding the first market analysis portion of our project. And the first one was to study retail consumer activity in the city. And so we really want to better understand who that Beaumont customer is and really what your retail market is. We'll talk about this in a second, but I think a lot of times there's a perception of Beaumont that you're one of those in-between communities where you're kind of in between a few different population hubs. And so when retailers look at you on a map, they might just see population of somewhere in the 50,000 range and kind of underestimate what your retail market is. So really that first objective is to really identify and understand what your core retail market is and what your retail trade area is, so we can go paint the best picture possible for retailers and developers to really sell the community. The second objective was to identify opportunities to grow or expand the city's retail base. And we really do that in 2 ways. So identifying what new retailers, restaurants, and service businesses, entertainment facilities that we could bring into the community, but also to help equip existing business owners. One of the things that we never want to do when we come into a community is we don't want to give the perception that we're trying to replace existing business. We want to grow from both aspects. We want to bring in new retail where we can, and then we want to help existing retailers grow and expand as well. So we've shared a lot of this data with existing business owners. Kyle has a direct avenue to that existing business base as well. And I know we've shared some data and they're coming to him with questions. So really focusing on both ends of that spectrum. And the third, I kind of tied in there already, but to be that resource to local business owners, we want to provide some of the same data that Fortune 500 companies are using for those existing businesses so they can grow their retail business as well. In terms of our scope of work and where we're at to this point, we had 6 key phases in our project. And so to date, we've completed the first 5 of those phases. And we're actually in that 6th phase now, where we'll be through the end of the contract, where we're actually going out and recruiting retailers and developers to the community. But throughout that process, through those first 5 phases, we've completed our actual market analysis. So coming in and looking at the community, looking at all the data on the retail market, on those consumers, identifying where there's retail opportunities. So we looked at what we call retail demand outlook. So identifying what retail sectors have the most growth potential over the next 5 years. We looked at what's called a retail gap analysis. So we can identify where the most money is leaking the community. So what retail sectors people are actually leaving to go to other markets to get. So if they're leaving for retail and restaurants in other markets, really identifying not only just what category they're leaving for, but all the way down to the specific retailers, restaurants, shopping centers they're leaving the community to go buy goods and services at. Third was identifying development communities. You're in a unique position where, a lot of the growth coming out of LA, you have a lot of development opportunities where you can actually develop retail from the ground up. So we spent time really identifying where those development opportunities are and kind of what's highest best use for that available property. Fourth phase was retailer and developer matching. So we actually have a list of, I believe it's 40 to 50 retailers that we've identified as a good fit for the city that we're actively recruiting as a part of that process. And then phase 5 was putting together our marketing and branding materials. So putting together, nice packages for retailers, putting together custom feasibility packages that show them the opportunity in the market, and really everything that we need, and then ultimately that Kyle and the staff need to go out and market the community at retail events and when they're talking to retailers and developers. So all of those 5 phases have been completed to this point, and we actually kicked off our recruitment the first week of April, which I think is really good from a timing perspective, because we actually were about a month early. So we ended up being able to kind of fast track a lot of the data and analysis work. And with COVID, California, I think, is lagging by a few weeks with some of the restrictions you have in place. But a lot of the retailers and developers that we're talking to right now are actually telling us that we're in what they call the post-COVID market. And so with us going out and starting to recruit that retail, I think we're really starting that at a good time where we're going to catch a lot of these retailers coming back to some of their pre-COVID development plans and really looking at and solidifying their expansion plans for post-COVID growth. So I think we're in a really good place there just from a timing perspective. So real quickly, just kind of the agenda of what we're going to talk through on the data side. We'll look at our retail trade area analysis. So that's where people are coming from to shop and dine in the community. That's driven from cell phone data. So we actually have GPS data that shows us where people are coming to the community or coming into the community from to shop and dine. Retail opportunities, so that projected demand growth of where we see opportunities for retail in that market. Zip code analysis, so the top zip codes that people are coming from into the community, and then a retail leakage analysis, so the most frequented stores and restaurants that people are actually leaving the market to visit most frequently when they're going other places. So jumping into our retail trade area analysis, a retail trade area, if you haven't heard that term before, a lot of communities will look at their demographics in kind of computer model form. So they'll look at predetermined radius or geometry to identify what their actual population and their demographics look like. A lot of times that's 5-mile radius. So how many people are within a 5-mile radius of the city center? They'll look at just the city limits. So if you look at just the city limits for Beaumont, you've got really good demographics. You're a fast-growing community, population just over 50,000 last time I checked. But that doesn't really tell the full story when we're talking to retailers and developers, because you have so many people coming into the community on a daily basis from other places. And so what we're trying to do with that retail trade area analysis is really capture with as much accuracy as possible where those people are coming from and what that true retail market is outside of just looking at your city limits. And so when we did that, we came up with this kind of unique shape that you can see back here. And I'll get a bigger picture here. But if we look at that, we actually hand drew this blue shape based off of GPS data that we collected from consumer cell phones. So we actually we drew a geofence around the top 15 retail locations across the city. And we're actually able to track retail foot traffic to those top 15 retail locations. And so when we do that, basically how that works is anyone that has a smartphone, either an Apple or Android smartphone that has one of the top 1,000 apps from either app store downloaded on their phone, and they have their location settings enabled, we can actually track that data in the aggregate, and we can see where people are going for retail and dining, and really ultimately where they're going when they're shopping. And so we use that data to plot that foot traffic and identify what that core customer is. And so that trade area is pretty massive compared to just the city limits. So the population for that trade area is over 150,000. It's up at over 155,000. And that's really good. And the reason that that's important for us when looking at this market is because retailers look at markets kind of diagnostically. They're looking for a few key factors. The first and most important in a lot of cases is population. And so a lot of retailers have population benchmarks that they have to meet when they're looking at new markets. And when we get up over that 150,000 mark, that really opens you up to a lot of those kind of next level retailers that aren't in the market currently. And that really paints a good picture for the amount of people that are coming into and out of the community. And so it really just helps us sell that market to its fullest potential and really show retailers what that true retail trade market is. Within that trade area, the average household income is up over 90,000, which is 92,157. And that median household income is just almost at 70,000, 68,512. And those numbers are important. So talking about retailers looking diagnostically, those are really the three key factors that retailers look at any new market. And so to be up over 90,000 for that average household income is well above average. That's really good in terms of just solidifying that there's enough money there for them to justify and that there's enough retail demand to justify the market. Same with that median household income. Those two are relatively interchangeable when we're talking to retailers, but it really helps us paint the market in a better light when retailers are looking at that, because the way that you're situated and the way that people flow into and out of your community, you really don't get that full story when you're just looking at city limits, or even when you're looking at computer models like a radial, or if they said, okay, let's look at a 10 or 15 minute drive time. I've sat in enough traffic on 10 to know that you're not getting very far most days in 15 minutes. And so for us, it's the most accurate way possible to really sell that market and really paint the best picture possible there.
Austin, I have a question real quick.
Yes, sir.
Where do you get this income data from? Because I've seen different numbers recently, like within the last 3 months, different numbers that you're projecting. I'm just wondering where you're getting that information.
Yep, we use two different services. The first that we use probably about 80% of the time, which I believe is the core for this data set, is a group called Esri. They're actually based not too far from y'all. Esri is the gold standard for retailers. When they go in and map and look at new potential locations, they typically pull Esri data for their demographics. So we use Esri because that's going to mirror a lot of the same demographic data that retailers are seeing. We also have a second source that we'll supplement with sometimes called Claritas, but we typically tend to stick with Esri because they're kind of the industry standard for the retail industry.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Can I follow up
I'm
on
just curious
that,
on those numbers you
Ashton?
saw. On the numbers you saw, were they higher or lower than what we're showing?
The numbers I saw were lower.
Okay.
Can I interject something before you move on? And then I don't see any age median age on this one here, age group. On my record, it shows 36 years old, that the average we have in Beaumont, but I don't see it on your report on that. And I think it's a good factor for us to identify that.
Absolutely. I just changed my slide. I'm not sure if you can see it. These numbers are a little hard to see, but on this right-hand corner over here, we have some additional data for that trade area. The median age we're showing is at 39, and the average age is at 40. That will differ from just specifically the city limits if you're looking at the demographics just for the city, because we're pulling from a different area. We've got more people in there, so that tends to distribute across that entire area. So those numbers will be different because we're comparing it for this entire retail trade area than just the city. That said, an average age at just over 40, almost 41, that's a good sign for most retailers. And we'll see that a little bit in some data in a minute here that we'll look at called psychographics. We looked at a socioeconomic and behavioral breakdown of who's in that retail trade area in the community. And from a demographics perspective, you really have a desirable set of demographics because it shows that you've got a mix of wealthy, established individuals in the community. So a little bit of an older population. You can see that on this age breakdown where you've got 20% of the population is 65 and older, but you're not at a point where that pushes you into the realm of being considered a retirement community or an older community. You also have a really good mix of breakdown within that that age range that's in that young families. So, young families that are looking to get established and maybe making a first home purchase, or families that have young children or school-age children. So you really have a good distribution across those age ranges in terms of what retailers are looking for. Retailers love to see a good mix across these age ranges because it presents opportunities for them to really capture a whole bunch of different sales, whether that's clothing for school-age children or things that you have to buy continuously. So as kids outgrow their clothing, or if there's sporting goods that they need when new seasons come up, families, having needs for multiple people as opposed to maybe one or two in a household. So those numbers look really good in terms of what retailers are looking for. I actually had to reassure Kyle that I wasn't telling him what he wanted to hear when we were talking through the demographics for the community, because from a diagnostic perspective, you really do have strong demographics in terms of just hitting all the marks that retailers are kind of looking for in those new markets. I think you also have a lot of potential with a lot of the growth coming out of some of the metro areas with people moving out of Los Angeles and some of those core population hubs. You're going to get a lot of that residential growth, especially some of that's already planned on that southeast border. And I know they're building a lot of homes in Banning as well that ultimately will become part of your retail trade area when they move into the market. So I think that looks good right now as it stands for retailers, but I think it's also going to keep getting better as the community continues to build out.
Hey,
Austin,
Austin.
I have one comment.
Yep.
I think it'll help member Beneke as well as Councilmember Santos. So, Councilmember Santos, you said our median age was 36 or somewhere near that, and member Beneke, you were referencing the average income levels, right? I bet you were looking at like the city limits versus this custom trade area. So it would be impossible to find a data set to match this with or compare or contrast with, because it was hand drawn from the retail coach, and then all the data within the boundaries was coupled into this trade area. We do have the same exact statistics for the city itself. So we could compare and contrast what the trade area demographics are with the city demographics, and we have that for the psychographic data as well. It's an interesting review when you look at both of them side by side. But what we wanted to do for this one, for the sake of time, because we didn't want to bore you with data all day long or all night long, was just look at the trade area stuff.
Hey,
well, that
Kyle,
makes-
can I have a quick question on this since we're on this screen right now for Austin?
Absolutely.
Okay. On the the ranges on the your studies, you're right. On the we do look on the 5 miles radius on here, and then you have a I like to see how many drive by who goes to our retail and how many percent that really goes within the city, and I don't see it in here right now. And I know probably you have that data, and that'll be interesting for the city to understand, how many really drive by. I call it drive by because going to Palm Spring to on other low desert, they stop by in our city, and especially Highland Springs. I like to have a data on that so this council understand what really driven our business in here on that. How many in a week, maybe a month, or maybe in a quarter. That'll be interesting to find out. Thank you, Austin.
Yep, absolutely. And I know Kyle will more than likely follow up with some of that data. We've got a ton of data. We kind of distilled it down into a high level view to make sure we could really cover everything. But happy to share all that data with you, and I know Kyle can talk through some of that as well. I'm actually going to move on from here to talk a little bit about what you were talking about, the drive-by and people coming through or passing through the community. This is an example of some of the zip code analyses that we did for key shopping centers and retail centers in the market. And so really what this shows us is where the bulk of your traffic is coming from. So where people are coming from to visit those retail centers. And it's important for us because it helps us come up with that retail trade area and really define that trade area. But it also just solidifies in retailers' minds that when they're coming to this market, they're really tapping into 4 or 5 other markets. One note before we dig into this, when we look at this primary retail trade area, the reason we call that a primary retail trade area is because we're relatively conservative when we look at that data. When we pull that cell phone data, we get a ton of data, just massive data points on where people are coming from. So for a lot of these retail locations, we look back 2 years and we can tell if someone just made one visit to the retailer, we can actually see that national traffic. So we can see if someone was in town from New York City and happened to stop and buy something in the community or visit a store, we can actually see that traffic. So this blue area here, the primary retail trade area, we're a little more conservative on that. So we like to say that this is kind of your weekly and monthly consumer. So this is someone who's going to be in the community maybe once a quarter frequency, or as your everyday shopper. We're working on what we're calling a secondary retail trade area that really looks at, okay, how many people visited maybe twice a year as opposed to what we call regularly. And that's going to include a massive area as well. So there's going to be a lot of data on that in terms of what those secondary markets are. But we try to keep this relatively conservative because with retailers, we don't want to just blow this trade area up as big as possible and really kind of say, hey, there's 500,000 people in the market, because they'll look at it and have some skepticism about it if it feels too large. So we try to make sure this is as conservative as possible. And a side note there, with being conservative in this, you still have a really strong primary retail trade area. We can actually probably extend it out a little bit further, maybe get to 175,000 people in that trade area. But for us, keeping it as tight as possible and really focusing on core customer, you have a really strong primary retail trade area. So getting into the zip codes here. So these are a couple of examples. The one on the left is from Beaumont Marketplace. The one on the right is from Oak Valley Town Center. And so what we're looking at here is the percentage of people that are actually visiting those shopping centers and what zip codes their home address is registered to. And so when you look at Beaumont Marketplace, for example, Beaumont is the 92223 zip code accounts for 13%, just under 13% of the people that visit that shopping center. Banning is at 7.85%. Yucaipa, San Jacinto, 2%, Hemet, another for San Jacinto, all the way out to Desert Hot Springs. So there's people that, to your point, those drive-throughs or drive-bys that are actually stopping in that live in Desert Hot Springs. Hemet, Calamisa, Moreno Valley. So really, as you start to look at that, you can see that people are coming into and out of the community from really all over the region. And it's interesting to see that because you'll notice by type of shopping center, you'll see a little bit of a change in that distribution of those zip codes. For instance, Beaumont Marketplace has a lot more larger retailers. It's got a lot of that national tenant base. It's more of a national kind of power center versus Oak Valley Town Center being more of a neighborhood market, right? Your grocery center. So you're going to see a lot more local traffic for Oak Valley Town Center. So almost 25% of that is Beaumont. 10, almost 11% Banning, Yucaipa, Calamisa, Redlands. So you're trying to get people from Redlands that are coming in. Hemet, Cabazon, Moreno Valley. So really, as you start to get down through that list, and we cut those lists off, there's a lot more that aren't registering really high percentages, but are actually visiting or stopping at some of these retailers. So it really helps us solidify that retail trade area and then go paint that picture of, hey, there's a lot more activity happening here than just their citizens that are living in Beaumont. They're getting people from way outside the community. A couple more examples. Walmart, 13% of the traffic from Beaumont. Yucaipa, almost 10%. Banning, Desert Hot Springs again. San Jacinto, Hemet, Calamisa, Redlands, Same center. So you're starting to see a lot of that pattern there and really a lot of those same markets. I won't really go through all the detail on these, but Home Depot and Kohl's, again, with some of these that are a little bit more local, you're going to see that distribution change. So, 20% of those visitors coming from Beaumont for Home Depot, and then a mix through there of some of the more local, all the way down to, Cathedral City. Same with Kohl's, you've got that same mix in those top 3 or 4 that people are coming from. But again, really interesting data that just helps us go and paint that picture to retailers that this really is more of a regional market than just the city by itself. Kyle, any notes that you wanted to add there in terms of the zip codes?
Well, it makes sense to me for the Home Depot, because if we all go to Home Depot, we always buy a bunch of stuff, right? And obviously you're not going to expect someone to load up their pickup truck with a bunch of wood sticking out the back from Desert Hot Springs. Although 1% of them are doing that, you don't expect it to be a large number, right? But you're able to see where people are coming from. And this data set is not like a revelation to me, who's been in the city for a while, but it solidifies the thought processes that I've been having with actual data sets, right? Because before, if I was looking at a Lowe's to add to the city, I would have to talk to Lowe's and say, well, I think there's a lot of people from Banning and Yucaipa and Calamasa and maybe Hemet and San Jacinto that visit our local Home Depot. And now I can remove the I think portion from that conversation with Lowe's, because we now know what it is. So we're able to, and what's interesting about it is that Lowe's probably already knows that too. But this allows us to have a higher level discussion with those retailers and kind of up our game in terms of those discussions, so that they know that we have the data sets, that we know what we're talking about, and we're not wasting their time, and they're not wasting ours. I liked the next slide where you have Raising Cane's. I like that one, but I'll let you present it.
Yeah, so Raising Cane's is another one, one of the newer retailers, but it just solidifies exactly what you're talking about, Kyle. And one of the things we always say is, none of this data is really revolutionary. Just because we have this data doesn't mean that we're going to go get 15 different retailers, but it does help really solidify some of the conceptions that we have and some of those really just thoughts that you have about the market of, we know people are coming in, but we don't know how to prove it. This really helps us prove that people are coming in from surrounding communities and that they're part of the market. I think it's really interesting on Raising Cane's with something that you would consider more local. They are a national fast food chain. They're on the freeways, so they're going to get a lot of traffic, but you're getting a lot more traffic than we would typically see from a quick serve restaurant from outside the community. I think part of that has to do with some of the novelty they still have, just with being a newer retailer in general. But only 17% of that traffic is coming from Beaumont. You're getting a good mix from other markets. Over 4.5% from Indio, which I think is really interesting. So that, to me, what that says is that's probably not people that are coming from Indio just to come eat or shop, but if they're passing through, if they're driving into another community or they're driving home from somewhere else, that you're pulling people off the freeway. You're getting people that are stopping and actually buying things or eating, and it really just helps us make the case there. Any other questions from the zip code analysis before we move on from there?
I'm just curious, you have most of the local zip codes within maybe 40, 50 mile radius. We do have the busiest freeway in the United States in the number of cars that traffic that freeway. I'm just wondering, and I know we do, because every time I go shopping in one of our centers, I see out-of-state license plates. So I know people traveling do stop at our retail venues and businesses, but I don't see that's not being tracked. Is that just too difficult to track, or is that data that you're not really interested in? I would think that would be a plus, having that freeway run through your city. And if there's any way to gather that data, I'm not sure if there is.
Absolutely. So we actually have that data for all the retailers that we tracked for this zip code analysis and for that trade area analysis. It's when they're coming from out of state, it's typically in smaller percentages overall because it tracks back to zip codes. So it just distribution wise, it gets pushed to the bottom of the list. So we have that data. We can share it with you. The other part of that is retailers, when they're looking at markets, they're really interested in that core customer. So they don't want to bank on out of state or out of town traffic if it's too far. So, we tried to balance a mix of really within a reasonable range for them to consider that everyday or secondary customer, just because that's not going to really push them over the edge. It's too much of a risk, but it's certainly helpful data. We do have it. We can share it with you after this call as well.
Yeah, I'm sure the numbers are small percentage wise because we're looking at zip codes in other states. And as you can see, there's even the zip codes somewhat near us are down in that 1% range. And like Austin said, to go to a retailer with that, it probably isn't useful. But Member Beneke, you've piqued my interest on how many people from out of state are going there. Austin, is there a way to aggregate the out of state zip codes all together?
We can get the data set and filter it out and just focus on out of state. We can find a way
Or
to
we
make
just
the,
add
to
all
get the data together.
the 0.01% from the out of states or whatever it is and just see kind of what it is? I mean, it would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have a visual form of that as well. We have heat maps that we can zoom out to a national level or regional level. And we can actually show based on a heat map on a map where hotspots are that you're getting people from out of state and even nationally. So we can definitely do that. We can kind of slice that data any way we need to. I think an interesting point on that question too is Kyle and I talked about this because when you look at the demand analysis and the retail gap analysis, one of the areas that shows up as a high area of opportunity for you is gasoline stations or gas stations, fueling stations. And that's something that most people don't really like. It's not really something that everyone's excited to get a gas station, but I think with where you're positioned and some of the developments coming up and open land, you've got a huge opportunity for all that traffic coming through to capture some of that tax base when people are pulling off and getting gas and filling up. And most of the time, if someone's going to stop and get gas, they might stop somewhere else. So it gives you an opportunity to capture a lot of that pass-through traffic where if someone wasn't going to stop, they might be able to. So I think there's a huge opportunity there kind of along the lines of that traffic and the amount of traffic coming through.
I also see a lot of people coming out of LA kind of using Beaumont as a place to get their groceries as they go out to the river or other destinations, camping, whatever. Also, I've noticed that we are building or have been building a lot of RV storage places. I guess the business there is that people in LA who buy these RVs like to have them like here, so they don't have to drive through LA to get out to the desert. They just drive their little car to one of these RV centers, get in their RV, load up with their groceries, etc., camping gear, whatever, clothes, and then they take off or wherever. So that there's maybe some opportunities there to kind of capture that, down the road, so to speak.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you say that. I work with the city of Indio as well and work in a few other cities in Riverside County. And, when you're heading out to Indio, you'll see a lot of the people that are heading out to the desert that are going out to Palm Springs or Palm Desert. A lot of that drivers or a lot of the population going out there, they kind of look at Banning and Beaumont combined as kind of that eastern border because there's a little bit of a gap there before you get to Cabazon and some of those other areas. So I think there is a kind of a strategic opportunity in being kind of the last stop in the sense of stopping and getting gas or getting food before you're heading out to the desert or before you're going to some of these other destinations. So I think there's an opportunity there as well in terms of really capturing some of the traffic flowing out, especially eastbound. But, if you think about traffic going westbound as well, you've got people that are passing through or moving to other metro areas or somebody that might commute from a little bit further east who's coming into Redlands or San Jacinto or some of these other areas. So I think there's a broad mix there.
Good point. That's a good point.
Hey, Kyle,
Yes.
Do you anticipate this kind of information to enhance our opportunities to get nicer restaurants?
It definitely shows that we pull from a larger area than we've thought, right? So I think the next step, and Austin has some of this, is looking at the surplus gap analysis or leakage analysis, where we can see where our Beaumont residents or people in the trade area are going to in terms of industry sectors. So if we're able to look at fine dining or whatever types of dining that you're looking at, we can see our numbers in terms of if people are going there as much as they say they are, or if everyone in Beaumont's going to a fine dining restaurant every week, or if they only go there once every 6 months.
Right.
Those are the types of things that we can look at. We can also find data where if you're saying, hey, we want what's a good one? Ruth's Chris, right? So we can find where's the nearest Ruth's Chris. Everyone says we need one of those. We can actually check how many people from Beaumont went to that Ruth's Chris in the last year or so. And it may be a large number, it may be a small number, but at least we'll know what it is, as opposed to what people are saying is going on. Hopefully that makes sense. Because I think people's perception on how often they frequent fine dining may be different than actual reality.
Understood. All right. Well, I'm optimistic. Looks good.
And I think that was Alan who asked that question. Sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the cameras. But to your point there, I don't, in terms of nicer restaurants, if we're talking, white tablecloth type restaurants.
Actually, Austin, are you familiar with Slater's?
I am. Yep.
Okay. They said no, they won't come up here. Demographics don't support it. But the demographics they were looking at are 2.5 years old. So I'm trying to get them to come up. By the same token, Marie Callender's, they said the same thing. We're right on the edge. They're willing to consider it. We're looking at, things better than Applebee's, better than Chili's, for more alternative, maybe an Outback.
Exactly. And that's kind of where I was going there. I think the nicer kind of high-end restaurants are probably out of reach. Most of those restaurant concepts have pulled back, and they're really looking at kind of core urban areas. One of the cities we work with is Laguna Niguel in Orange County, and they've got a high density of high net worth individuals. And we've even had trouble getting nicer restaurants to Laguna Niguel. And so it's hard when you're talking about some of those higher tier ones, but I do think there's an opportunity for kind of that mid-range of what we call casual sit-down restaurants that might be a step up from some of the kind of cookie cutter national brands. So that's one of the areas that we're focused on from a recruitment perspective is, you've got your bases covered on a lot of the fast casual and quick serve restaurants, the fast food, you've got a good mix there, but kind of that next step up where you can go and get dinner and a drink and maybe eat for an hour and a half and kind of enjoy the experience. So I think there's an opportunity there. We'll talk a little bit about that data here in a second as well. Just real quick on this one, key takeaway, people are coming from surrounding areas into the market. Those top draw areas that I think are really kind of practical and that you're going to see and go, yeah, we've known they're coming in, but it's nice to quantify it, is Banning, Yucaipa, Cal Mesa, San Jacinto, and Hemet. Again, you're drawing from way further outside of that, but I think those are really the core areas when we're selling the community to retailers and developers. Those are the core that they're going to want to see that traffic from. So that's a really good sign. Opportunity that we have on there. We actually took this from one of the presentations we did with the existing business owners and small businesses, but marketing to surrounding communities to grow a customer base. That's one of the things when we shared this data with existing business owners that we really tried to hammer home to them was really thinking outside of just Beaumont. And a lot of them track their credit card data, but I think it was validating and helpful for them to realize not only that people are coming in from other markets, but to get really targeted on where they're actually focusing their marketing efforts and where they're trying to get new customers from. So we were encouraging them to do things like target these zip codes by going out and getting Facebook ads and things like that and running ads to these other areas. So I think there's a lot of practical use in that data set just outside of us trying to recruit new retailers with it as well. So jumping over a little bit, Kyle, you talked about this a second ago with some of those restaurants. This is what we call our retail leakage. We have a separate data set that Kyle can share with you that has kind of quantifiable numbers of where we see the most leakage from a dollars perspective. That's really helpful and just kind of validating some of those assumptions that you already have. But one of the things that we find really helpful and really practical with retailers is looking at the specific places that people are leaving Beaumont to go shop and eat at the most. So this is where people are going to outside of the market. And it's actually broken down by specific shopping centers they're going to. And then we have a mix of some of the restaurants that people are leaving for. But we looked at a mix of really, okay, where are people going to the most? And so Tri-Center Corporate Center in San Bernardino. So 40% of that primary retail trade area has made a visit there in the last year. So a lot of people are going to that Tri-City Corporate Center. Sun Lakes Village in Banning, Citrus Plaza in Redlands, 35% of the traffic there from Beaumont. Mountain Grove at Citrus Plaza, so kind of tied in there together. The outlets out in Cabazon, Ontario Mills, 22% of this market was actually making at least one visit out there in the last year. Victoria Gardens and Rancho Cucamonga, Pavilion at Redlands, Towngate Promenade at Moreno Valley. So really just kind of solidifying that not only are more people coming into Beaumont to shop and dine than we thought there were, but really hammering home the fact that there's also a ton of opportunity because people are still leaving the market to go buy goods and services other places. And so the way that we use this data and the way it's more helpful to us is that we use it to identify specific opportunities. So if people are leaving the market and they're going to the same places or the same brands over and over again, and that's far enough away from a store spacing perspective, we want to go to that restaurant or that retailer. We want to say, hey, you're getting a lot of traffic from this area, but we actually think that you can support another location in Beaumont because you already have a strong customer base here. And we think that, you're not going to cannibalize too much of your sales at this location if you come to Beaumont. So it really helps us map that out for retailers and put that together and show them mixed in with store spacing that there really is a market for them in Beaumont, and kind of reverse engineering is the way that we approach it. Some of the restaurants on here I think are interesting. Corky's Kitchen and Bakery in Yucaipa, not something I was familiar with. I had to Google it and look it up. Has anyone been?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So pretty much everybody's in that 14%, huh? Red Robin Gourmet Burgers. So I'm not a huge Red Robin fan, but it's a great restaurant chain. They do good business. I think to your point, Alan, that's a sign of kind of that next step up. Instead of just some of these fast food burger chains, you want to go and enjoy a burger somewhere and actually get the full experience, the full service. Chick-fil-A, no surprise. In-N-Out, Olive Garden, BJ's Brewhouse. And then you've got another In-N-Out, and then Baker's Drive-Thru in Calamasa. We cut that list off. We just grabbed some we thought were interesting. We've got a full data set that we can share with you that shows some of the more detail there. But again, the real value in this data set is helping us reverse engineer if there's any specific locations that we could look at as comparable developments that we could go and say, okay, this retailer works here. They have a customer base in Beaumont. Let's try to replicate that in Beaumont if we can. And this is just a quick example of some of the local business data that we got from that cell phone data. So we looked at the Craft Lounge. We actually ran a cell phone analysis for them to give them some info on their business. And nothing really revolutionary here or really that's going to change anything. But it helped them really kind of identify where that core customer for their business is coming from. You see a lot of the same on the zip code analysis where, they're getting 40% of their traffic from Beaumont, but they're getting a good chunk from other places as well. So 15% from Banning, 3% from Yucaipa, Redlands, 3% of traffic in Redlands, Colton, Riverside, Moreno Valley. And so we actually gave them a list of that and encouraged them to use that from a marketing perspective to really try to hammer home in whether it's Facebook advertising or ways that you can target that advertising to those zip codes. One of the things we also found that was interesting was the daily visits. So when people are visiting the most. And so we can break down that foot traffic by what day they visited, how many times they frequented it. We can actually see the hourly visits, so what time of day they came. And then we can actually see, it's too small to see here, but we can actually see what we call an experience map, we call it a customer journey, but it's basically where people are coming from before they go to a restaurant or a retailer, and then where they're going after. And so you can really dig in and kind of see what that customer journey looks like from the sense of, are people coming from work? Are they picking up food on the way home from work? Are they coming from home? Are they visiting on the weekend? What does that look like? How does that retailer or restaurant fit into the customer journey for the market as a whole? And so this is just really helpful data. We have this at a macro level for the community as a whole based on that larger data set that we did for the retail trade area. But practical application, we've done this for a few local existing businesses as well. And we think there's a ton of value in helping equip those existing business owners with the same data that people like Target and other Fortune 500 companies are using for their real estate development.
So Austin, I just wanted to reference this one last time. So to the committee members, if you know a small business owner that operates in our city, have them give me a call and we will map this out for them for free, zero cost. I think it's worthwhile because you understand where your people are coming from. You can use social media ads to target those zip codes, which you can actually do via Facebook or Twitter, those types of things. The Craft Lounge one I thought was interesting, and this is a good spin-off. So if you see that to or from where people are coming from, you may not be able to see it, but I can see it. Most people are coming from home, right? Like 58%. But 1% of the people that are going to the Craft Lounge were at Domenico's Italian Kitchen on Beaumont Avenue before that. Well, why is that? Why would that be important for the business owner? Well, we know the Craft Lounge doesn't have food. So it looks like 1% of their patrons go pick up a pizza or some pasta before going over there, or they eat at Domenico's when they had seating. They don't have seating anymore. But you could see where maybe that owner of this business contacts Domenico's and it works out some sort of partnership, right? Where, hey, buy a pizza here, get $1 off a beer at Craft Lounge or something like that. It's better to take $5 for a beer versus $6 because you may not have received that $6 beer if they didn't get the cool coupon at Domenico's. So it's just a good example of how you could spin it off. So if you guys know anyone that would be interested in this data set, just have them call me or email me, and then I'll get them in touch with the retail coach, and we'll run one of these for their business for free.
Kyle, I have a question. Is that something we could maybe have the Chamber of Commerce kind of help out with on their website, or do we not want to broadcast it that much?
I don't care who knows about it. That becomes Austin's problem if he has to run like 200 of these things all at one time. So I've tried my best to get out there, or we've published this on our Facebook account. I believe Betty from the Chamber did share this with her membership. We've received an initial interest in it, so we've ran a couple of these for different businesses as a result of the webinar that Austin and I did. But to be honest, I'm thinking that most of these retailers are just struggling with the reopening plans in the state, and they haven't got past that yet. So I'm not quite sure they're aware of this program or they're interested in participating at this point in time. But next when I can start meeting with people in person again, I really plan to hammer this type of program home with basically every restaurant and hopefully every retailer within the city, at least the small ones. We don't need to do this with Best Buy because they already have it, but it's really intended for the small or the franchisees that maybe don't have the stuff.
You know,
Yeah.
Kyle, I could probably use something like this for our real estate offices.
Oh, like where people are coming from to your office?
Well, yeah,
Of
I mean,
course, yeah.
no, I mean, to show how the demographics are changing and while Beaumont is a great place to live.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
could use it for that purpose as well. You could also use it to figure out where people walking into your office are coming from.
Yeah.
Maybe
I'll
they're
talk
going
to you about
to the craft lounge before they come to your place to buy a house.
Hey, you would hope so. They might be a little easier to close, huh? That's a great point. And I think, you know, the core for us on this data, one of the key values we have is just helping those existing business owners. You know, whenever we come in and work in a community, we really focus on making sure there's not a perception from the local business community that they're not important or that we're trying to replace those businesses with big national brands. That's important to us. We do a lot of downtown revitalization work. We work with a lot of chambers too. So we're really cognizant of that and just want to make sure that we're giving those same resources to existing businesses. The other practical piece of that is, you know, we see a lot of value come out of it. Most businesses, especially small businesses, really find value in things like the visits by day and the visit by hours. A lot of local mom and pop shops or local businesses are really open from 9 to 5 or 10 to 6. And one of the things we can show them with data is that they're missing a lot of the traffic that's out there. Most retail purchases still happen after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I believe it's 80% of in-store purchases happen after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So we've worked in a ton of communities where we've helped downtown groups and local businesses really identify how they can even do things as small as shift their hours on a couple of days a week where they're maybe open from 11 to 7 instead of 9 to 5. And we've seen a huge boost just in being where the customer is when they're there and helping businesses that way. So I think there's a ton of practical value. On the timing note, I think with COVID and kind of the recovery aspect of getting back to normal, one of the things Kyle and I talked about was our contract runs through the end of December for our first year. And so our offer is still valid throughout that entire contract. So if we want to come back to it, maybe midsummer, end of summer, when people are getting back into the swing of things, we can always come back and provide that data when they're ready for it. I know a lot of business owners are really just struggling to either get back up and running or kind of keep the doors open. So if it's something we need to come back and do later on, we can certainly do that as well. So I'll run through this pretty quickly. I'm not sure how we're doing on time on your end, but run through this pretty quickly. This is what we call our retail opportunities. So this is a retail demand growth analysis. And so what we look at when we look at this data is we're looking at what the current demand is, so 2021 demand for that retail trade area. So how much retail demand is there in a specific retail category? So we look at 66 different categories. And then we look at 5-year projected demand growth. So where is there the most projected growth in each of those categories? And then really what we're trying to do is just identify categories where there's an opportunity for high growth that we can go and really kind of target from a recruitment perspective. And so we've highlighted a few on here. Kyle, you just mentioned the Ulta opening. You know, one of the ones that I had highlighted on here that they obviously saw as well is that there's 4% annual growth, almost 4.5% annual growth in cosmetics, beauty supplies, and perfume stores. And so as your retail trade area starts to grow and as the community grows with people moving in and new residential developments, I think there's even more opportunity than we've captured here because this is just a current snapshot versus the projected demand. But, you know, it really helps us identify core areas where we see opportunity and ultimately where we think retail can be successful. I'll show you a couple of other examples that I think are interesting. Sporting goods stores, you're seeing almost 5%, so 4.7% annual growth year over year projected for sporting goods stores. And, you know, I don't think you're capturing a ton of that. You've got, you know, 1 or 2 options, but you don't really have that true quintessential sporting goods store. I think there could be some opportunity there. Pet and supply stores, you've got 4% annual growth over those 5 years projected. And the big box down here at the bottom is what we've already talked about. This is for food service and drinking places. And so when we look at, you know, for instance, full service restaurants, you've got 4+% annual growth over the next 5 years. I think there's a ton of opportunity because within that entire food services and drinking places sector, you've got growth in every category over the next 5 years. And really, when we look at this data, if we see anything that's over 2.5% projected demand growth, that kind of signals to us and to retailers that that's a hot market that could be a good market for a retailer for the next 15, 20 years. And so, when we look at numbers up over that 4% mark in that annual growth, that's a really good sign that there's opportunity there. And so really across the entire spectrum of food services and drinking places, you've got a ton of demand growth there. So I think that's a good sign, and that's something we can certainly go and kind of pique the interest with some of these restaurants that might look at the market.
Also noticed your gas station's at 5%, so
Yep.
you were right on when you said there's room for growth in the gas stations.
Exactly, and that's a harder one to sell.
I know it is.
It's not as sexy as some of the other stuff, and as appealing. It's one of those things that's kind of a necessary evil. But if you think about the opportunity to pull people off the highway when they would have passed through, I think it's a huge opportunity to get people into the market that wouldn't have stopped. And like I said, if somebody's stopping for gas, that makes them 10 times more likely to stop to eat or grab something else while they're in town. So that's a huge one. Kyle and I have actually already looked at a couple of spots for some gas stations that might work on some of the new development around a few.
And member Beneke, you touched on that, and it's funny because when a new gas station opens in Beaumont, right, the community's like, why is the city getting another gas station? And I mean, the data is the data. The data speaks for itself. You see 5% compounding annual growth, and that's telling gas station owners that they need to put another gas station here, right? I mean, we're not necessarily spending a bunch of our recruitment time and effort on gas stations. They typically happen organically, where those businesses identify the need within the community and come here. But you can also see that this data set matches what we're seeing in different areas. So you see the fast food restaurants or the limited service restaurants with very high numbers. We're seeing those come in. It's expected because they're not going to come into an area without growth or without demand analysis like this. So it really drives these retailers' decisions to be looking at this data. So it would be much harder if you had like a 0% growth to expect to see one of those come in here, right? You'd be looking at that business like, well, are you crazy? Like, why would you open something out here? So you can see where the data sets help us do what we need to do and also drive the decisions of the businesses themselves.
Austin,
I think it's a fantastic tool, and if I was a small business owner, a large percentage of your budget is in advertising, and you want to know where the best place is to advertise. You know where your customers are coming from. You can then target those various media or whatever you use to advertise to maximize your advertising dollar. So I think it's a very helpful tool.
Hey, Austin, I have a question. The forecasted demand for 2026, is that, and the growth related to it, is that based on expected population growth in our area, or what's the basis for the demand growth?
Yeah, great question. It's based on, it's an algorithm that ties in the current projected population growth, but it doesn't take into account planned developments or things that aren't already in that basic population growth curve. So it's just using the standard population growth over the last 5 years. It basically nets out an average and then uses that average to project for the next 5 years. So it doesn't take into account a lot of that new development that you're going to see in the city limits or just across in Banning, some of those new larger residential projects. So I actually think that this data set, while it's good and the numbers are actually a lot higher than we see in other communities, I still think it's a little bit low considering some of the growth that you're going to see just in that retail trade area from a residential perspective. It doesn't capture a lot of that growth that's either planned or is on the horizon. It's only capturing houses that are currently built and then some of that projected demand growth that's already there just based on that regular curve.
So is it possible that, I'm not sure if Kyle is working on this, that we can try to gather some more specific data on all the new developers coming in here and expected completion times an expected population for those developments? Is there anybody keeping track of those coming up, or is that something that we can maybe look at doing in the future?
Yeah, Dave, that's a really good point. We have that type of projection done at City Hall for our city limits. And we have a couple different models. We have like if a everything is okay model that shows what the demand curve on new residential and population is going to be. And then we have a recessionary model because we know that there's a recession at some point in time in the future going to occur. So there's another model that factors in a slowdown, if you will. It never truly drops to 0 new permits in a year because we didn't experience that during the Great Recession, but it definitely ramps down the number of houses that are built at that time. So we could reach out to our neighboring cities to see if they have a model like that. It's a decent amount of work for us to have it here. And I don't know if I'd be able to get that information from the other cities in order for me to run my own model for their city limits. So I would, maybe they have that they can share with us and we can kind of plug that in. One other thing I wanted to note on this one, and Austin, I apologize if you were going to hit this, but if you look at that 2021 demand number and you just look at the NEX codes or the industry codes, you see millions of dollars there, right? So it looks really encouraging. Look, there's demand in clothing and accessory stores for $46 million. So Kyle and Austin, go find $46 million worth of businesses to open here. It's not actually possible to do that because you have areas that are right next to us and other cities that already have that business, right? So like if we were banning it and we were looking for a Kohl's to fill that clothing and accessory store, well, that's not going to happen because Beaumont has one. And that happens vice versa with the surrounding communities. And then we have the fun animal that is online shopping. So we can't expect to ever come up with the demand number that's projected here. What we could try to do is knock off a portion of that total demand curve. So we would shoot at maybe 10% of that or something like that as a win over time. I just didn't want to present you these numbers in thinking that the city has the potential to increase its sales numbers by these large voluminous per industry group, because that would be insane. And that would represent like 0 leakage demand within a city, which is not actually possible. So I did want to talk about that. Another good example is like sporting goods stores, right? If part of that 9 million is people buying specialty stuff at Bass Pro Shops, well, we're never going to be able to get them to buy fishing equipment here at Walmart or another one if they really like going to Bass Pro Shops.
Yep. And you beat me to the punch, Kyle. We actually started using this retail demand growth analysis because retailers were more interested in the percentage growth and really seeing that positive curve in these categories. We used to use what we call retail gap analysis, and we actually ran one for the city just to see how it compares to the data that we're seeing on the demand side. We stopped using that though because it's a little misleading, because in a community like Beaumont, you're going to show $300 million in restaurant opportunity. And to Kyle's point, you're never going to capture all that. You just can't capture all that leakage, especially when you're looking at a retail trade area versus just your city limits. So it's really more important to focus on, okay, are we sending the right signals? Are retailers seeing the right data that they need to see to validate that this is a market? So really about having the data that helps us get in the door with those retailers to have the conversations about specific sites in the market. But to your point, Kyle, you're not going to capture 100% of that from a leakage perspective or even a demand perspective. And really what our goal is on the recruitment side is we just want to start chipping away at that. So we want to say, okay, what one retailer or restaurant can help us capture 2.5 or 3% of that leakage or that demand? What can we start doing to capture people and keep them from leaving? So maybe that's a restaurant that'll keep somebody from going into a surrounding community, go to a casual sit-down restaurant. Maybe they'll eat there once a month as opposed to going to a different market. or if they're coming home from work, they're more likely to stop and grab something in town versus, getting something on their way home closer to their office. So really trying to identify, okay, how do we start chipping away at that, knowing that we're not going to capture 100% of that. No community is. LA, San Diego, none of those larger markets can capture all that leakage either. It's just a matter of how the economy works. But in terms of what this data does for us with retailers, it's sending all the right signals. We're going back to kind of that diagnostic model. We're hitting all the check boxes that retailers are looking for. We're hitting that population mark. We're hitting the demographics marks with the ages and incomes. And then we're getting into, okay, is there enough demand here to support one of our stores or restaurants? And we're checking all those boxes. So that's really the most important thing from this data set for us. So one more thing that I wanted to jump into if we've got time for it, and I'm gonna have to switch this tab here. I wanted to look at what we call our psychographic analysis. And so psychographics, let me see if I've got it here. Here we go. So psychographics sounds like a really crazy word, but if you haven't heard of the word before, it's basically what we call consumer behavior. So demographics is what does our community look like? Psychographics is, okay, but what do people actually do? How are these people classified? What are their tendencies and their preferences? And so this map you're seeing just looks like a bunch of colors right now. It's kind of hard to tell what's on here, but essentially what this is what we call a life mode summary group. And so what we look at here is breaking down the community into block groups and life mode summary groups based on their characteristic traits and what groups they fall into on a deeper socioeconomic level. And so if you look at this map here, you'll see, you've got a lot of orange in this trade area up on this northwest side here, you kind of surrounding that outer border of that trade area. So what that breaks down to is affluent estates. So established wealth, educated, well-traveled married couples. We also have a lot of the darker pink in here. And so you'll see that those are senior styles. So senior lifestyles reveal the effects of saving for retirement. You've also got a mix in here of some of the light pink and some of these other categories. I've talked about that mix of the breakdown of demographics by age range. That's where you start to see that median age come in and you start to see those what they call family landscapes. So successful younger families in newer housing. So that's more of your suburban crowd, right? They're moving out to the suburbs. They're starting a family. They're living in neighborhoods. They're buying a lot of the new houses being developed in these markets. And so you've got a really good mix in there. And it really just, again, kind of validates what we saw on the actual demographic side, but it gives us a little bit deeper insights into who's in each one of those categories. Some of the others in here, you've got some of these 5A, that breaks down into what they call Gen X urban. So Gen X and middle age, families with fewer kids and a mortgage. So really kind of see, we've got it kind of broken down by those block groups and how those people actually function and the types of things they do, the life stages or the life modes that they're in. And so just wanted to look through a little bit of these with y'all. I have to be careful on these. These are really, these are interesting to look at. And I think to Kyle's point that he's made about this data, it's helpful from a city management perspective to really kind of identify who makes up the community and kind of these clumps of people that have the same tendencies, the same traits. But there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. They're painting with a broad brush. So sometimes some of the categories that they have are kind of interesting, and don't take it personally if it's not something that sounds great. I think a great example is when we look at these tapestry segmentations, the elders is one of the top categories, which doesn't sound great, but that just basically means that you're falling into that category that has established wealth. You might be retiring or you've saved for retirement. You're typically in that 55 plus to 60 plus range. So really just kind of qualitatively saying, okay, where do these people fit in some of these life mode segments? But I think the core takeaway here, and Kyle, I know you wanted to, go ahead.
Just for the record, we didn't name any of these things. So these, if you don't like the names, they came from Esri. So I have some suggestions to them on some name changes, but they may not listen to me.
Yeah. But these are, this is just a breakdown of the top tapestry segments that you see in these categories. This, I think, is more practical and more useful from a city management perspective. Retailers do look at some of this data, but it's not something that they primarily make decisions on. This helps support if they're looking at a community and they're trying to make a decision between community A and community B, they may dig into some of this psychographic data, but it's more so helpful in terms of just really understanding the dynamic of the community. So I'll look at a couple of these. I'm gonna jump down through here and just show you some of the data that we have in terms of how they're qualifying these life mode groups and getting into some of the deeper tendencies they have. So 9C, the elders, was that one of the top life groups that actually shows up on the map for the retail trade area. You can see here their median age. They're older. They're 72. Median household income's 40,000. That's lower than you'd expect, typically because that's retirement income, right? So you're getting people that are pulling Social Security or have retirement income. They may not have a steady flow of income because they've got other retirement accounts set up. But it's really interesting to see some of the data they have on them and how they talk about what they do, what their tendencies are. So this one says suburban periphery of metropolitan areas, primarily in warmer climates. So they've got Florida and Arizona on there, but California has a lot of these clusters of population. 45% married couples without children, 44% single household. Average household size is 1.68. They typically own their homes, so owner-occupied housing units. They've got a mix of single-family homes, townhomes, high-density apartments. Some of their socioeconomic traits, so predominantly retirees, low labor force participation, so less than a quarter of them work. Again, that's because they're retired. So those who do work are typically self-employed or part-timers, the most time real estate, retail, or the arts. So when we get down into consumer propensity, which I think is kind of the core value of all these different life mode groups, these consumers have definite opinions about their spending. So they're focused on price, but not at the expense of quality. They prefer to use coupons and buy American environmentally safe products. Cell phones are common, but primarily used to make and receive calls. So really kind of deeper breakdown of not only just who they are from a demographic perspective, but really the tendencies they have and then some of their consumer shopping data. So we won't go through all this. This is just a breakdown of some of the key data that we looked at there for that group. But I'll jump to another group real quick and see. Let's go to one of those young family groups and see the difference there, if we've got it in here. So here's an example of the affluent estates. So this was that orange area that was up kind of the northwest side and around the edge of the retail trade area. So the way they classify that is median age is 34, average household size 3.25, decent median household income. That's in some of those, that's kind of the higher range of what they track on median household income. But the way they classify it is this is the new growth market with a profile similar to the original, young professionals with families that have opted to trade up to the newest housing in the suburbs. So for that to be your second or third highest life mode group, I think again just validates the assumption that we had about the market, which is that you've got a lot of people that have good jobs that are moving out of some of these metropolitan areas, that are moving into suburban neighborhoods. They have families, they're relatively young, they want to start a life somewhere, they want to actually invest in a community, they want to live in neighborhoods and actually enjoy being with their neighbors. So that's a really good life mode group that you would want to have that retailers would look at favorably. It's also a signal that you're getting good high growth rates coming out of other larger markets. So, a lot of that's going to be that LA crowd or Orange County crowd that's moving out of some of these suburban areas looking for a better place to raise a family or start a life.
In Austin.
Oh, I know you dug into this. Anything that you wanted to highlight?
We not only see this in the trade area over in the Yucaipa region, but we actually see this predominantly within the Fairway Canyon Tournament Hills area within the city limits. So if you pull up the city limit one, you'll see that color there. And I think both council members, I just realized that both of the council members on the EDC are in real estate. You guys know more about who's moving in and where they come from and their buying power and so forth. So you would be a good barometer on whether these groups are actually correct from what you're seeing in the real world versus data sets.
Yes, Kyle, I mean, this way. And no, you're right on the presentations. You're right on that. And my experience right now, they're coming from Orange County, San Diego, and Los Angeles. Part of Los Angeles will be, West Los Angeles. So you're right on that. I mean, we're experiencing, the growth, and they're coming in like crazy right now. We cannot keep the inventory. I'm talking about, from range, 400,000 to, hit 700,000. So, so hold tight in there. So we're doing well. I mean, on Beaumont itself. You're right on that. Thank you.
And I think there was a question earlier about making sure that we were projecting for a lot of that planned new development or that residential development. Retailers don't necessarily put a ton of weight on stuff that hasn't already been developed. They try to be as objective as possible about what's currently on the ground. But it is helpful for us to have this kind of supplemental data. And to your point about the real estate market, it's just a further validation for us that the market's growing, that demographic is changing a bit. You're getting the right demographic that's moving in. And then from a retail perspective, the opportunity that comes with that. Because what happens when people are moving out of larger markets into smaller communities or suburban communities is that their tastes don't change. They still like a lot of the same retailers and restaurants. And so there's an opportunity there for us to be able to replicate some things that potentially wouldn't have looked at Beaumont in the past that we can bring in now because there's that larger population base that's already been their customer in other markets. So they tend to kind of follow some of that outflow as well. So I think there's going to be some opportunity there with that demographic shift, certainly over the next 3 to 5 years, but even, what we've already seen to this point, and by the end of this year with all the new development going on, I think that's a huge plus from a retailer perspective. And it gives us some other ammo or some arrows to put in our quiver when we're going out and talking to retailers when we can really sell that and show them the data that shows that the market is really kind of growing into the ideal market for them.
Can I interject something on that? I mean, the reason, I ask everyone who's moving in our beautiful city is it's safe in Beaumont. Crime rate is low. They do their work on this. So, cleanliness and then the reputation of the city is beautiful right now. I should say it will continue. I mean, we're doing well on the city. So they do check that. I don't know what kind of data they're getting, and they're the one who's coming in. So they do their homework. They do check from Rancho Cucamonga up to Indio on the 10 freeway corridor, and we're on top of that. So I'd just like to share that. Thank you. This is within this quarter only. Thanks.
And that just goes to the point too. I think one of the things that we do is when we're looking at markets and we're doing retail recruitment, one of the first things we always do in a new market or city that we're working in is we come in and look at it through the eyes of a retailer. We do site selection for a lot of large national retailers and restaurants, and in certain markets we'll help them go in and identify where they're going to go. And one of the things that we do when we're doing our site selection work is we're always coming in and looking at those things that are more so kind of community development than economic development. And we always say that economic development or community development precedes economic development. And so when your community is clean and it's livable and it looks like a good community that people want to live in, then that's going to translate to retailers and restaurants feeling good about that market and wanting to be there. And just from my perspective and having been to Beaumont and driven the community and been through a few times, you check all those boxes as well. So on the data side, I think we're in a good position where the demographics look good, the growth looks good, the opportunities there. And then when you pair that with some of that community development and the fact that you are a community that people do want to come into and move into and build their lives in, I think it puts us in a really good spot for our ongoing recruitment. And I think that's probably a good wrap point, Kyle. I think I'm probably way over my time, but one of the things that we're looking at now is where do we go from here? And so I mentioned earlier, I'm going to jump back here real quick. I mentioned our timeline earlier. So we just started our recruitment process. Our initial contract, that initial 12 months runs through the end of December of this year. And so we really, for the remainder of our contract, our focus is on that recruitment aspect. And so we started that a couple weeks ago. We've already gotten really good feedback from some of our retailers that we're trying to get to the community. So that's where our focus will be for the next through 7 months, whatever, I guess 8 months now at this point, through the end of that first contract is actually going out and having these conversations with those retailers and developers. So as part of that process, we've sent them custom feasibility packages that have all this data in it that are catered to them specifically as a brand. And we've even had a few phone calls from our first round of recruitment. I was on a call the other day with a broker for a grocery chain, talking about some of the sites in town and talking about opportunities. So that's really where our focus is now that we've gotten a bulk of the data done. Kyle, I know you've got a lot of the detailed data that you can share out with the committee, and we certainly can, if there's other needs that come up or if there's certain data sets that we haven't done yet that you would like to look at, we can run those as well. But we're kind of shifting our gears from the data, the market analysis to really hammering on the day-to-day retail recruitment, getting on calls, getting in front of these retailers and developers. And then as we're working through that process, we're having monthly update calls with Kyle and the team there at the city so we can keep them in the loop on the conversations we're having, who we're reaching out to. And then as Kyle gets calls or interest or wants us to reach out to additional retailers and developers, we've got an open line of communication and are working together to get in front of as many as we can. Kyle, anything I missed or anything you wanted to highlight?
No, I think that's perfect. So I know that we're in the process of uploading some of these documents to our city website so that if you want to look at it in more depth, but if you as a committee member want any of this stuff, I could easily just email it to you and you can take a look at it or read it at your pleasure. Does anyone else have any questions for Austin while he's here with us today? And if you think of any questions that you may want to ask after the meeting's over, because we bombarded you with a bunch of data sets and information, and it's going to take you some time to think through that. If you come up with questions tomorrow or late tonight while you're sitting at home trying to go to sleep and you're thinking of us, write those down and send them over to me and I'll get those responses back.
Good stuff, guys. Thanks, Austin.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Austin, excellent. I mean, just like what Kyle said, it's perfect. And I'm so excited. I mean, seeing the psychographic, analysis in there, and that's the one I'm looking for. I mean, I really appreciate that and a lot of details on that. So I could have more detail on that, so I could analyze that. Thank you so much. Good presentation for both of you.
Thank you.
I mean, Kyle also. Kyle, thanks.
Allow me to echo that, Mr. Warsinski and Mr. Farmer. Outstanding presentation. With that said, and hearing no other comments in that area, we'll move to topics for future agendas. Are there any recommendations from the body as to items from these three that should be included on our future agendas? Any recommendations? Are there any recommendations for future agenda items? Hearing
I
none.
don't know where we're at in looking at the downtown area, but I would think as we move forward in recruiting businesses to some of our primary locations, we need to look at downtown as well for potential recruitment. I know it's a big job. There's a lot of pieces to this big puzzle. but I think we need to start somewhere. And so as a future agenda item, I think we ought to address some of the problems we see, or maybe some of the problems you see, Kyle, with developing the downtown area, maybe some tools that other cities have used. I know redevelopment really put a big crunch into a lot of what we can do or could do finance-wise, but there are other ways to finance things if the business people downtown want to get on board and have something happen down there. So maybe just as a discussion item in the future, we can agendize that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll work on something. If we can bring it back to the next meeting, we'll do so. If it's going to take a couple, I'll just put it on future agenda items as a placeholder until we're able to bring back a report.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Are there any other recommendations for topics for future agendas? Hearing none, we will move on to the area of reports. Are there any of our members or committee members who have a report they'd like to offer? I would definitely like to say one thing, and I will ask for forgiveness from our seasoned politicians or elected officials, Council Member Santos and Council Member Finn, because nowhere in Robert's Rules of Order is it probably in style to give a shout out, but I certainly would like to do that to the city of Beaumont, to our mayor and council members, as well as Mr. Parton and his job and that of Mr. Warsinski. I don't know about you all, but living here in Beaumont, our streets are certainly riding awful well lately. And I am enjoying being able to take a ride through Beaumont and see the beautiful work that's been done. So a shout out again, that's probably not in Robert's Rules of Order, but a shout out to our elected officials as well as our city staff have done a fabulous job in bringing our streets up to par, and really enjoying that. So just wanted to say that. Are there any reports that coming from members? I have one other ask, and then I'm going to be done. We are at Mount San Jacinto are having a conference in April titled Future of Work, and it is geared towards our bringing together educators from across our higher education scene to discuss how we serve our Gen Z students moving forward. These folks, as you're aware, are between the ages of about 6 and 24, and we have a number of them that attend, so we know they're a very astute and smart population, and so we have to figure out new ways to serve them moving forward. It was one of our activities there, and I sent you an email, Mr. Warsinski. You probably hadn't had a chance to get to it, to ask you to invite you to participate, and I know if your schedule's busy, I understand because you're a new dad, but we're having a Shark Tank event on Friday where the 12 colleges that will be participating will be bringing innovative ideas to present. And we have 4 judges now, and we need one more judge. And so we're looking for those individuals that are connected to the business community. I'll drop that hint, Ms. Rader, because of your connection to the chamber, or any other business owners, or we have real estate individuals in the house, but would love to have you participate. Again, it's on April 30th. It would only require about 3 hours of your time from 8:30 until 11:30. We will have a 1-hour training. Actually, it'll be less than an hour the day before, where we bring you together at 4 o'clock to give you the scripts and all the information as far as scoring sheets. And so if you have time and you want to volunteer, anyone that's a part of this committee, we'd love to have you because of your connection to economic and workforce development. That said, are there any other reports that might come before this body? Any other reports? Hearing none, at this time, we will entertain adjournment. I don't have to ask for it under Ms. Wheelwright, so we will declare at 5:45 the meeting of the Beaumont Economic Development Committee is adjourned.
Good meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Ms.